Hello everyone, I'm James Turk, and it's a pleasure to be here today with Adam Fleming, the chairman of WitsGold. You know, Adam, there's so much going on in the markets. The euro is fraying at the edges. The gold price took a hit over the past few weeks. Let's start by talking about gold. What's your view on the gold price, and maybe have we hit a bottom here with the big move yesterday back up?
I think it's very likely that we have. The subject of the gold price is always a little bit emotional because it's something that James, you and I have followed for many years, both of us believing that in due course it will become apparent to everyone that gold is the only money that politicians can't print. And as we all know, we talk gaily about quantitative easing, but actually at the end of the day it is printing fiat currency. And gold has been money for 5,000 years. And for the only time in that 5,000-year period, we've had this experiment since Nixon unbacked the dollar from gold. We've had this experiment in the last 30 or so years where currencies have no connection with precious metals. And I believe that this is all coming unwound as we speak. And the recent pressure on gold has only been matched, actually, by also the fall in the gold shares. And the reason I believe that gold is bottoming here is because the gold shares are trading at 2 standard deviations to the gold price. And this has only happened 5 times in the last 100 years. In the crash in 2008, in 2000, in 1980, I think way back in 1950s and in the 30s. So I think we're at an extraordinary inflection point with both gold and gold shares providing really unusual opportunity.
Yes. You know, we both spoke in August of 2005, as I recall, at Dawson City at the GATA conference that was there. And you were forecasting a price of approximately $3,000 an ounce. Keep in mind that gold was $400 at the time. We've come a long way. We're not too far from 3,000. Are we still headed higher in that direction?
Well, the gold price has gone up a lot since that time. But actually, you may laugh, but I think gold is cheaper now than it was then.
I'm not laughing because I know where you're going with this. Yeah. It's value that matters, not price.
I think what has happened since then has taken even inflationists or people who see this inflation taking place like you and me by surprise. I sometimes say it's not the price of gold. Gold is the same, whether it's in the time of Christ or now. A piece of gold is a piece of gold. That's what's so amazing about it. What is happening, though, is that the currencies against which it is being measured are being inflated substantially. And I like to look at a little metric that has held true over the last, certainly the last century, and that is how many ounces of gold it takes to buy 1 unit of the Dow Jones. And at the peaks in the market, like in 1928-9, like in 1966, like in 1980, like in 1999, it's taken many, many ounces of gold to buy 1 unit of the Dow. But it always reverts to 1 ounce of gold to buy 1 unit of the Dow. So I believe sometime in the future you'll be able to buy 1 unit of the Dow Jones for 1 ounce of gold. And whether the Dow Jones is at 30,000 and therefore it'll be $30,000 an ounce that the price of gold will be trading at, or whether we go into massive deflation and the Dow is at 2,000 and it's $2,000 an ounce. I believe that gold is real money and will provide extraordinary opportunities
Just to put
for those who see it.
Put some numbers on this. In the 30s, gold was 35 and the Dow Jones Industrials, believe it or not, was 34. In 1980, it was 800 on gold and 800 on the Dow. So at some point in time in the future, it's going to be 30,000 on each or 2,000 on each, but it basically doesn't matter in the sense that you're preserving your purchasing power for the foreseeable future until we hit that 1-to-1 ratio. Absolutely. And you're better off having the liquidity and also the avoidance of counterparty risk because you own a tangible asset, the value of which is not based on any one or any firm or any company or any bank's promise or any government's promise. It's based on the market's perception that for 5,000 years gold's been money, and for this foreseeable future it's going to remain money.
James, I think you nailed it. And there's one other interesting aspect I'd like to mention to your viewers, and that is that Standard Chartered, which is a very substantial bank, and I know the people there very well, they have a very good gold analytical group in Hong Kong. And they published last year a piece of research called In Gold We Trust. And the reason I mention this is most researchers look at the demand for gold, but they looked at the supply of gold going forward. Mm-hmm. Now, despite the fact that for the last 11 years, gold has proved to be an outstanding asset class. It's compounded at between 15 and 20% in almost any currencies you like to mention per annum. There have been no major new gold projects that have been started. So they looked at gold from a supply point of view. And for the next 5 years, the most optimistic prognosis they have, and this was after reviewing, as I say, 380 gold mining companies worldwide, the best prognosis they have is an increase in gold production of 3.5% a year for the next 5 years. As a result of that, and taking the demand side of gold, which they understand and subscribe to, they see gold going to $5,000. Now that's from a very serious major bank. That's not a small gold bug operation operating out of a niche market. So I thought that's very significant.
Is that perhaps because they have a good handle on what's happening in Hong Kong? You know, the gold inflows into China have been phenomenal over the past several months, and particularly in the past quarter. It's getting up to Indian type numbers for demand.
Well, JP Morgan, which is a major bank that us gold believers don't necessarily feel complete warmth towards, actually is a major player in the gold market. And I was talking to someone who knows them well, and apparently recently demand for gold for JP Morgan to supply gold into Singapore, which is the main conduit into China for JP Morgan, has been astonishing. There has just been absolutely amazing amounts of demand for the physical metal, and it disappears into China. So quite clearly, Chinese demand is ramping up, rather like it started to ramp up in the iron ore industry in the early 2000s. So I believe we're in the foothills of a very substantial secular bull market in the precious metals.
What's the driver in China? As you know, I lived in Asia for most of the 70s, and you're also an old Asian hand as well. Is it just the traditional cultural affinity toward gold, or is it other things? Is it inflation that's picking up, or is it just the fact that so much wealth is being created in China and gold flows to where the wealth is being created?
I think it's probably a combination of all these things. I mean, in the West, we talk about gold almost sneeringly when you raise the idea of gold as money. People say, well, actually, come on. But in our inner psyche, we still believe in gold. We talk about the golden opportunity, the golden chance, your gold credit card. You know, gold in the psyche of Westerners actually is a very valuable, beautiful, wonderful, historical
We
thing.
learn it as children in fairy tales and things of that nature.
But if you go to the East particularly, the East has lived through many iterations of currencies and many different political systems. And anyone who's lived in China for the last 50 years has seen extraordinary changes, eradication of wealth, things that you can't even begin to dream about. So it's that, I think, coupled with their very strong historic belief in gold, and also the administration, which I think is very shrewd. Okay, they're saying outwardly, because they don't want to rock the boat, they're saying, we hold the dollar as one of our most substantial reserve positions. But what I think has been so brilliant is that they've gone to their people and said, we would encourage you to save your money in the form of gold. And they've opened up this gold savings route, which really is in the best interests of their people. And I think that's a very enlightened view. And that is why I think it's real, genuine demand from personal private savers that is driving actually the gold market in China.
And when they're buying gold, the Chinese buy physical gold, obviously. They don't buy paper gold.
Well, you know, we can all talk about gold in someone else's vault. I remember talking to a representative of the Banque de France in the early days of the 2000s, when hedging was still considered to be something that every gold mining company should do, and central banks would lend out their gold for. They were, I would say, almost bamboozled into the belief that that lending their gold out for a pittance in terms of interest would be a good return on their money. But the man at the Banque de France said to me, "You lend your gold out, it's no longer gold. It's someone else's liability.
Yeah.
Gold is only what it says on the tin if it's in your safe with the key to the safe in your pocket."
Yeah, the tangible asset.
Exactly. The moment you hold a piece of paper that someone else is holding your gold, you've already now got another risk, which is that that person who's holding your gold will go bust and you won't return it.
Yeah, you turn a tangible asset into a financial asset, and the financial asset has counterparty risk.
The other point that people make, which I really take issue with, is that, well, gold is no good because gold does not bear an interest. Well, actually it does bear an interest, and for some reason it's called a lease rate. But no currency bears an interest unless you lend it out. If you have a dollar note in your hand, that's not bearing any interest. It's only when you lend it to someone else and they pay you interest on it that it becomes an interest-bearing piece of paper. Just as gold is money and doesn't bear interest until you lend it out.
Yeah.
So gold is no different from any other currency, except governments can't print it.
Yeah, you raise an interesting point about the lease rate. That's the politically correct term. You know, when gold was supposedly demonetized in 1971 by President Nixon, you could no longer call it interest because it wasn't supposed to be money anymore. So they came up with this term, you know, a lease rate rather than actual interest rate. Because interest rates, you know, when you borrow and lend money, you're paying interest rates, and that's essentially what it is for gold. And gold has a natural interest rate, although obviously central banks can influence the interest rate as well as they can the price as well. You know, we're sitting here in the beautiful island of Jersey, although it's not that nice a day today, but if it were clear, we could look over there and see the coast of France. But, you know, the euro, let's talk a little bit about the euro. Is it going to survive, or is it finished?
Well, I'm not a currency expert, James, you are, but I've never understood the euro experiment. I gather it was started off after the war, people saying, you know, we must stop this perfectly enlightened idea that we must avoid wars ever reoccurring on the mainland of Europe again, and we must have this common currency and political union. But I believe it is absolute madness to assume that someone in Italy will have the same economic or monetary view as someone in Germany, as someone in Ireland, as someone in Portugal. These are all nation states that have completely different cultures, different understandings, different ways of going about things. So I believe it's an experiment that is doomed to fail, and therefore I just think it's a question of time. And although everyone talks about the calamity of the euro collapsing, you know, the sun comes up in the morning, it goes down in the evening, just as it did when we had Deutschmarks and drachmas. So I believe that if there was a clean start, that the Greeks would return to what they're good at, which is the world's best shipping industry, the world's best ship owners, most shrewd operators of the shipping industry. Also a major tourist destination. People would flood back into Greece, and Greece's economy would take off, just as we have seen in Iceland, just as we saw in Argentina when they had to make a new start. So I think politicians don't like change, and they don't like losing control, but I believe that it's inevitable that the euro the euro experiment will fail.
Are the politicians going to try propping it up, though, in your view, to make it? Oh,
I'm sure we'll see.
You know, to prolong the agony, you know, rather than admitting that it's not
I can
working.
only be cynical. I'm sure there will be an experiment on a scale unthought of monetary printing to try and keep the thing together. How long that will last, I do not know. But all it will emphasize is that precious metals are the haven that I believe them to be.
Yeah.
And I think that it'll be possibly the driver of the next stage of the bull market in the precious metals.
Okay. I know you're an expert on South Africa, and I've been waiting to ask you a couple questions about there. When did you first actually start investing and really looking at South Africa and more generally Southern Africa in terms of the investment opportunities?
James, I can't boast that my timing in life is always the top. So I became a gold bull in 1990, 10 years too early, before Gordon Brown managed to sell half of Britain's gold in 1999-2000, which now I have to tell you is called the Brown bottom because he managed to hit the exact low of the gold price. But
what an amazing thing to go down in history for, huh?
The prudent man, yes. My little story is that I went out to South Africa in '91 to open the offices of Robert Fleming, which at that time was the family banking operation, and I got involved in the gold mining industry on my own behalf. And throughout the 90s and even to today, South Africa was going through great change, and there were no shortage of people who said that it was going to end in disaster. And we had the elections in '95, which I remember the BBC saying that it was bound to end in a revolution. Well, there was a revolution. It was a revolution of a wholly good kind. It was the most peaceful election you'd have seen. When I first arrived in South Africa in '91, you could lie on the road between Pretoria and Johannesburg and smoke a cigarette, which was then politically okay to do, between cars passing. I mean, hardly anyone owned a motor car in South Africa. Mm-hmm. There was absolutely no economic ownership by the black community. Mm-hmm. Today, the roads are gridlocked in South Africa. There's been enormous enormous economic endowment to the black community. They're now a nascent black middle class. And all I could say to your viewers is just go for a holiday there and you will be hit by a wave of raw energy, particularly in Johannesburg, which also gets an extraordinarily bad press. I lived in Johannesburg with my family and children. They went to school there. We've never had any incidents, no difficulties at all. Mm-hmm. I think what you have to understand with South Africa is that the ANC is a very broad church. I know many people in the ANC and I have a high regard for them. And they've been going since 1913, so they're not a recent iteration. And they have, I would say, almost a naive desire to allow debate on any subject. The subject of nationalization has recently come up with
nationalization of the mines.
Nationalization of the mines with Julius Malema, who was head of the ANC Youth League, strutting around talking about nationalization. Now, I can tell you, nationalization wasn't ever on the original charter of the ANC. It was never, ever policy, and it never, according to the Minister of Mines, will be policy. And yet, because this individual, who was a bit of a firebrand, was seen as a representative of a part of the ANC, the press leapt on this as, South Africa is going to nationalize everything and it's going to go the way of Zimbabwe. Mm-hmm. Well, they allowed him to have his say. He has then been completely removed from the ANC. The Youth League now have embraced Kgalema Motlanthe, who is the deputy president and a very highly regarded, moderate and wise individual. It's one thing after another. If it's not, President Mandela retiring as president, that was going to cause disaster. Then President Mbeki retiring as president, that was going to cause disaster. Then it was nationalization of the mines, that's going to cause disaster. Well, if it's not nationalization of the mines, it's something else. There is this tremendous endowment, I think, going right back to the old years of political isolation that the newspaper industry have of trying to pick on the negatives. The positives of this country is that it's had radical transformation. It's got a democratic, freely elected government.
With a regular succession of presidents democratically elected.
And as far as the mining industry is concerned, the whole subject of black empowerment has been debated with industry, the taxation has been debated with industry. And I can tell you as a gold miner, there are very few destinations in the world that have the same first world level of infrastructure, roads, electricity. There's been problems with electricity, but that has been, a plan has been made, and it is now something that is being dealt with. Water reticulation, mining laws, mining taxation, very, very clear. Okay, there may be periods of inefficiency, but all I can tell you is that compared to places that are very far away from any infrastructure, where you have to rely on a political deal with a local headman, where you've got no tarred roads, no electricity, you have to bring everything in. South Africa is an extraordinary destination. Mm-hmm. And remember the other point about South Africa. South Africa has produced 40% of all the gold that has ever been mined in this world. It is, as Saudi Arabia is to oil, South Africa is to gold. Now, as Standard Chartered said, there's been no serious new gold developments anywhere in the world in the last, serious new developments in the world in the last decade. For Newmont or Barrick, who have to discover between 6 and 8 million ounces a year just to keep their reserve static, it's just unbelievable to me that at some point in the future the world won't have to come back to the Witwatersrand, this enormous gold system. It is a unique gold system, yeah, where 50% of the remaining reserves of gold in the world still exist. The known gold that exists underground, 50% of it is in South Africa. According to the US Geological Survey, that is where still the greatest depository of gold. And now Anglo-American are talking about mining down to 5 kilometers. This is the world's largest underground mining operation. Major strides in mechanization are taking place. And if you go down to the Free State, where our little company has substantial resources, I get stopped in the street by people saying, when are you going to start the new mine? Mm-hmm. This is a major political imperative. It's not nationalization, it's not taxation, mm-hmm, it's jobs. That is really what South Africa needs to produce, and there is huge political emphasis on that, which is not being understood or picked up in world press. So the key really is investment, and are they encouraging foreign investment? They are, but inevitably they could do more. Mm-hmm. What is, to me, as a value investor, what to me is the key here is what do you pay for an ounce of gold in South Africa? And in Canada you pay $1,100 an ounce of resource of gold. In Africa you pay $400 an ounce of resource of gold. In South Africa you pay $100 an ounce of gold. And companies like mine, Little WitsGold, you're paying $1 an ounce of gold. This is, people will look back, I think, on this and say it was an extraordinary opportunity for investors. Yeah. Both gold shares and also the South African gold majors. Yeah. I guess, looking at it from the point of view, if you believe this 5,000-year history of gold as money is going to continue for the foreseeable future, and the fact that 50% of the unmined gold in the world is still in South Africa, the future of South Africa is going to be bright because somehow or another that gold is going to be mined. And it will attract the investment and therefore create the jobs. Absolutely. Yeah. I really believe that. Well, Adam, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for taking the time, and best of luck with WitsGold. It's my pleasure.